there's just like a lot of like little vague things that are kind of thrown out there. She's in this Victorian house. Her great-grandmother also fell in love with her stalker. Her great-grandmother was murdered. It's a mystery. Who killed her? Like, is the house haunted? Hello. So today I wanted to talk about two books that you may have seen either on BookTube or BookTok or just around. We have Haunting Adeline and the sequel Hunting Adeline. The only thing I knew about Haunting Adeline going into it was that it was a stalker romance. I'm like, okay, so a woman is being stalked. She ends up becoming in a relationship with him. I thought that that was a really interesting premise for a book, actually. I figured having a stalker being a very scary situation, but the idea of that person being sort of flattered despite themselves by this other person being obsessed with them, and it's raining outside, so if you can hear that, I'm sorry. Also the idea that of her sort of becoming addicted to the attention, to the thrill of this person seeking her out. And I don't know, something about that, the idea of just craving that interaction despite herself, and how like shameful that would feel to want that even though you know you shouldn't. I thought it was a really interesting premise for a book. So when I kept seeing Haunting Adeline everywhere, I did know going into it that there was some smut in it, which I could take it or leave. I don't mind it. But I thought that there would still be a good base to the story. So that's sort of all I went in knowing about. I knew there was a sequel, but I had no idea what the second book was about. So that's kind of how I went into it. After having read it, I'm not sure that a lot of people are reading this for the plot. There is not just some smut, there is a lot of smut, specifically. But anyway, so we have our main character. Her name is Adeline. She is an author. The man who becomes obsessed with her, his name is Zaid. So she is just at a book signing, and he just happens to see her photograph as he's walking by outside. And he peeks his head in, and he sees her, and he is just immediately obsessed. Like, she's just something about the way she looks and the vibe she gives off, his first impression of her. He's just like I can't even call it insta-love because it's not really like love, it's just infatuation, but it is instant and it is intense. Adeline also has a friend. What is her name? Does her name really matter? Daya doesn't really matter to the story so much. She's kind of just there to propel Adeline into different situations while allowing Adeline to still kind of seem less promiscuous, maybe. Daya's the one who she takes her phone and tries to text some guy to hook up with him. She's the one who drags Adeline out to go to the club. So it kind of allows our main character to get into these sexual interactions without her seeming overly promiscuous because her friend's kind of dragging her along. Daya, she is described as being a hacker, that is her job. Which, like, there are people who do that, obviously, as a job, I guess. But something about the way that struck me as I was reading it. Like, I literally, when I wrote down notes about it, I wrote, why is everyone a hacker? Did a teenager write this? Which is it turns out to be a little bit unfair. It's just that both her friend, Daya, and this stalker, Zaid, turn out to be hackers. And in the beginning, they don't seem to be related to each other in any way. They don't know each other. So it just seems as if both of these people are randomly hackers. Now, with Zaid, he has an organization just called Z. He is trying to fight human trafficking. His organization, they use hacking and they infiltrate different groups and whatnot to break up human trafficking rings, to free these girls, whatever. The book is written, it flips back and forth between Adeline's perspective and Zaid's perspective. So that kind of comes across to me in the first book. Zaid's entire profession is very, very confusing because when you are looking at it from his perspective, he's talking about how sick it makes him, these people who are trafficking these girls. He's just appalled by them. He's disgusted by them. He just thinks that they are the worst of the worst. He dedicates his life to trying to end human trafficking and then proceeds to stalk and assault our main character, Adeline. And it's very confusing because while people in real life can be walking contradictions, it doesn't really work that well for me, because when we're in his perspective, it's not this thing where outwardly he's just sort of virtue signaling, whereas inside he's actually like interested in it or intrigued by it or something. His inner monologue is him being repulsed by these people. For him to have that thought process and then stalk this woman, break into her home, terrify her, SA her. And this is the thing. This is why, if you've heard of this book at all and you know that it might be a little bit controversial, it's dark. That's part of what drew me to it. You know, I like extreme stuff, but I think if you know you're going to be reading an extreme horror, you're kind of going in with a certain mindset. Whereas this is not an extreme horror book. This is a dark romance. And yes, I knew that there was a stalker, and yes, I knew that there was going to be some spice. Our first spicy scene between our two main characters was so insane to me that, spoiler, he breaks into her home and he uses a pew-pew. He doesn't point it at her, he uses it. He uses it. Which to me is actually one of probably the worst thing that happens in the entire book. Like, oh my god. I can't really think of something that is terrifying. That is terrifying. But the thing is when he does that, she's like kind of into it. So that's kind of what breeds this relationship, is that in the beginning, he keeps forcing himself on her, but she's kind of into it, and then that kind of grows and develops to becoming a mutual relationship, like an actual romantic relationship. See, the thing about this, though, is that he didn't know her, okay? He saw a picture of her and saw her at a book signing books. All he knew about her is what she looked like, and then whatever he could find online researching her or whatever, which, you know, he's a hacker, so I'm sure a lot. But still, he doesn't know her at all. So if in his head, he is very, very anti-human trafficking, anti-girls being kidnapped or assaulted, but then he's going to go and do something similar to somebody. Oh, but it worked out because she was into it. But he had no way of knowing that. He had no way of knowing that she would be on board and have that kind of kink or whatever. That he didn't know that going into it. So it's okay, it happened to work out, I guess, within the story, but it just doesn't really make sense to me. The way it felt when I read the first book was that his entire career was just there to try to make him seem like less of a piece of shit. Every time I got to his chapters and it was talking about his work, I did not care. I did not care about it at all because it just seemed so disingenuous to the character that I'm seeing within the romance, which is supposed to be kind of the heart of the book. It was kind of frustrating when I would get to his chapters because when he's talking about Adeline, I'm like, okay, this is, it can be fun to have that dual perspective. But every time he started talking about his job, I just I did not care. I did not care about his relationship with other people on his team. I did not care about the girls he was rescuing, even though if that had been just its own story, I probably would have found it interesting. But within this story, I don't know, I just couldn't. I feel like that maybe would have worked better, and maybe what could have been interesting if everything about the book was the same, except for the fact that instead of him actually being a stalker, if they had been like a couple who were role playing, you know, because that kind of feels like that would have been more, yeah, it's a contradiction, but you're not actually hurting anybody. That would have maybe felt more believable. I guess that's the thing. It just didn't feel, it was too extreme. It was too on the nose extreme in other directions where it just didn't feel believable anymore. And his whole story arc outside of her felt, to me, in the first book, like it was just there to try to give him some kind of redeeming qualities. I understand what they're going for. That our main character Adeline is in denial because she doesn't want to want her stalker. She doesn't want to be turned on by what's happening. But she is, and so it's this thing where she's telling him she's threatening to call the police all the time. She's saying she's not interested in him, that she whatever, but her behavior is very much like inviting him into to pursue. And reading it, it's just kind of like kind of what I was looking for, but also like you could see that her thoughts and her behavior didn't match. But I guess I just wish I would have seen more of that like inner turmoil to vindicate that, like, yeah, these things don't match up. She at one point says to him, I don't want you to ask me. And that part was actually really, really nice, because it was nice to actually just hear her admit that and say that and acknowledge it so that we can like move on. Instead of like trying to live within this farce, just understand that it's like a role play situation. You're not actually hurting me, and it's like, it's fine, it's just like a game. Other parts about this story. She lives in a Victorian house. There's also this plot about her mother. Who cares? Nobody cares. The thing is that like she lives in a house that was left to her from her great-grandmother. You find out that her great-grandmother also had a stalker. Like she finds her journal and she sees all these entries where she admits that she had a stalker that she fell in love with. And it's like, so it's genetic, I guess. Is Adeline and Zaid a reincarnation of her great grandmother and her stalker? Like there's just like a lot of things that are kind of just like thrown out there as like there's no answers. It's not concrete. It's just like, oh, there's like little hints of like there being ghosts. It's just like a lot. It's a lot that doesn't actually lead anywhere. I think the intention is to just sort of set the vibe, so to speak. The thing with the smut. The first one, again, for me, the pew-pew, like, no. No. But like, I'm not here to kink shame. Like, you do you. Like, if you either don't mind reading this sort of stuff, or like, let's be real, if you want to read this sort of stuff, like, there is plenty of smut in this book. It is raining outside, so it got very dark very quickly. The first book for me was, I didn't care about his story at all. Their relationship, it was one of those things where it was such like a train wreck that you couldn't really look away. The smut was probably, I don't want to say the best part, but like that, the relationship between them. Like I really didn't care about any of the other like tidbits besides the journal entries. But when I was done with the book, I was just kind of like, like it was just sort of okay. And I saw that the second book was actually going to focus more on the human trafficking angle. And so because that was the part that I didn't care about at all in the first book, I was kind of like, I don't know. But it was available with my Kindle Unlimited, so I was like, okay, I don't have to pay for it. And I was actually so glad that I did, because shockingly, I actually liked the second book better than the first. In Hunting Adeline, what has occurred is because Zaid is the head of this anti-human trafficking organization called Z, he has put a large target on Adeline, basically, because she is his, that she's worth a lot of money to be trafficked herself. So she gets kidnapped. He thinks he's infiltrating this pedo ring, and in fact it was all set up, and they try to capture him. Now he is able to get away with he has like a kind of like a sidekick who goes by Jay, who they are able to ultimately escape. However, Adeline has been kidnapped. About half of the book is her being held hostage. She goes to this place where they kind of prep women or girls to be trafficked, trying to make them good sex slaves, basically. There's a lot of torture that happens there, but it's a lot of essay that happens there. So I hesitate to call it spice, because that's the thing, is that in this book it kind of shows, okay, here's non-consensual SA, but it's just the crime. Like, nobody's into it, it's just the crime. It's not presented in a way to be like actually spicy the way that the scenes in the first book are. The first half of the book, she's in this organization. There's people there, but honestly, like, their names don't really matter. Just know that she's being held captive, that there's like kind of like a lead woman, and then there's a bunch of men who kind of like, if you fall out of line, then they're just going to assault you and beat you up or whatever. During this time, he is obviously Zaid with his organization. This is what he does for a living. So they're going to track her down, and he's pursuing her, trying to find her, because this is the love of his life, who he's going to be with forever. And I was actually pleasantly surprised to see that like half of the book is them being separate, and her having this experience and him trying to find her just trying to survive. It's very hard because obviously they know that he's looking for her, so they're really keeping her under wraps until she can be sold, and they're expecting her to sell for a very high price because she's beautiful, but mostly because she is his. They go to try to rescue her. At that same time, she happens to have found an opportunity to escape the house. Zaid finds where she's hiding, he rescues her, whatever. So this is something where I was also very pleasantly surprised about. So halfway they're separated. 50% of the book, they're not together. Now at this point we have 50% of the book left. So about half of that, so about 25% of the book is her recovering mentally and physically from this experience. And I did appreciate that, actually. It was kind of weird. When I went on Goodreads, I saw a comment that was criticizing, saying that her recovery from such a traumatic experience was way too fast. But I actually felt like they took a decent amount of time with her recovery, where it didn't feel like she was done recovering by the end of the book, but it's just like she was not just jumping right back into an intimate relationship with Zaid. She had a lot of mental and emotional issues. She would not let him touch her, and it was something where it's like this weird poignancy where he's not forcing himself on her now, because now that would be fucked up, as opposed to the beginning of the book where it wasn't, because she was into it, even though he had no way of knowing that. Okay, anyway, so he's not doing that now, and he's kind of, because he actually cares about her, he is trying to be supportive, he's trying to be patient, but she is really going through it, understandably so. She has a lot of scars left on her from the men who would, so she has a lot of physical scars on top of her mental scars. She was kind of gradually able to open up and be in a physical romantic relationship with him again. I would say the last 25% of the book, they are starting to be intimate again, and that is really the only place in the book where there is any legitimate spice, but there is a lot of it in that last quarter of the book. So if you are looking for the spice, that like all of the spice, again, because I would not consider the beginning non-consensual scenes, I would not really consider that spice. So pretty much all the spice of the book is in the last, 25 to 30% of it. It becomes this thing where, because he's this, he's not just a hacker, he's, as the head of this human trafficking thing, he's very dangerous, he's very like threatening and in shape and whatever. And he sort of teaches her how to defend herself, basically. Like, he teaches her how to be threatening. He teaches her how to shoot a gun and how to, do different things. And so that kind of is one of the things that empowers her to feel more safe in her own skin and more safe with him. That feeling like she can defend herself if she needs to. The human trafficking angle was more interesting in this book. It's the core of it is still their relationship. The way that in the beginning it's about the house and being haunted and stuff. In the second book, it's like very much like the government. It's not just like, oh, I'm against human trafficking rings and that's what it's like this big government, what's the word? Conspiracy. Yeah. If they take down all the human trafficking rings, then they're gonna take down the government. Like, it's also interconnected or whatever. And so that part gets a little bit weird. It kind of just feels like the story may be trying to be a little bit more than what it is, trying to be bigger than its britches, so to speak. There's also something in the second book in particular that I thought was kind of weird. It felt like the author felt the need to insert some of her political or social views. And it's not that I really care, but it just felt really random and out of place. Like, there's just like a random thing about abortion. There's also a mention of they make it very clear, they really want to make sure that that this one character is bisexual, but it doesn't affect the story in any way. And then other characteristics of him not having traditional masculine traits. I guess it's giving shape to his character, but also none of it is relevant to the story in any way because he's such a minor character. It just felt random. It didn't feel organic to the story. It felt kind of like pigeonholed in there. Yeah, there was another comment, something about choosing to feed into the patriarchy, which I think is also a really weird sentence to have in this book. Like, I don't know, it just felt very, like, all these sorts of viewpoints, I don't care. It just felt out of place the way that it was executed. This is kind of embarrassing, but there was actually a moment in the book that I actually got kind of emotional. I got a little emotional during a part where she's talking about how she doesn't want Zayd to touch her because every time he does, she just pictures all these other men who hurt her when she was being held captive. Like, she can't handle the thought of him touching her. And she breaks down and she just is like mourning the fact that she's never going to be the same. Even if she improves and gets better and healthier, she's never going to be the person that she was. And she will always have these memories, and she will always have this baggage. And that part actually made me kind of emotional, honestly. It made me feel bad. It's just like, yeah, like those things that happen in life that you genuinely, you can't go back, and you never are the same ever again. I disagree with people who I've seen in different reviews saying that they didn't think enough time was given to her recovery. I thought that there was a lot of poignancy in the moments that were given, and considering how long the book is and how long they were separated, I think it was a very reasonable amount of time for the biggest portion of her recovery, especially because it jumps in time as well. It'll be like, oh, like 2 months later or whatever. Her being, he trains her to be a big baddie. They are back together. They are running his organization and trying to take down the government. If you are someone who is used to reading like extreme horror, this isn't even touching on that, even though, again, to me, the pew pew, like, God. In general, it's not going to compare to those sorts of things. I do think that people who are not used to reading that, because this is listed as a dark romance, if you're used to reading romances, was probably kind of intense at parts. Because yeah, that was something else I found confusing in reviews. The essay scenes were so in-depth and so detailed, and I didn't think that they were. But I'm guessing that that's, again, comparing someone who's used to reading extreme horror compared to someone who's used to reading romance. So I guess I will say in conclusion, would I recommend them? Well, I enjoyed the second book, and you really can't appreciate the second book unless you read the first book. But I definitely think it's not for everybody. It's definitely not for everybody. So again, you have to keep in mind your trigger warnings. If you're not okay with that, if it makes you uncomfy, then just don't. Just don't. If you're used to reading extreme horror, this is going to be nothing for you. The first book is more for the smut. The second book is more for the plot, for me. So if you do try it, I would just recommend being patient with it, because it took me a little bit of time to get into it. I wasn't sure how I felt about the writing when I first started it, because it did just seem like, I don't want to say childish, that seems really unfair, especially considering that there's so much porn in it. It just seemed very, I don't know, kind of simplistic. If you're willing to just sort of not fixate on it making sense and just sort of enjoy the ride, if you're able to do that, then, you know, great. If you're someone who it's going to drive you crazy that just certain things don't make sense and you're not going to be able to kind of look past those details, this book will drive you, both of these books will drive you crazy, so don't bother. But yeah, overall, I don't regret reading them. I don't regret reading them, and like I said, the second book, actually, there was moments that I got emotional. So, you know, there's that. If you're still here, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And maybe I'll see you the next time around. Bye. What's his name? He has one. Zaid? Yeah. Okay, so the man who becomes